Hello. Tonight you wander into a world that exists long before kings, walls, or written names. You stand beside two ancient rivers while the earth still remembers the cold breath of the last ice age. Somewhere beyond the darkness, soft water moves through empty plains that have not yet learned the sound of human footsteps. The night feels endless here, calm and slow, like a lantern glowing quietly in another room long after everyone else has fallen asleep. You drift above the plain between the Tigris and Euphrates around 10,000 BCE, when the earth still holds moisture from melting northern glaciers. Soft brown land stretches beneath a pale silver sky, while thin winds carry dust gently across the empty ground, like flour floating through sunlight inside an old kitchen left untouched since early Tuesday afternoon. The rivers move quietly through darkness, spreading into marshes filled with reeds taller than standing figures. Water birds settle beside shallow pools while frogs murmur softly beneath wet mud. Geological studies later reveal this region becoming one of the richest floodplains in the ancient Near East. Even now, before cities rise, the soil waits patiently like bread dough beneath warm cloth. So before you get completely comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you truly enjoy what we're creating here. And while the night settles softly around you, feel free to share your local time and location in the comments below. Somewhere else in the world, another listener may also be awake beside a glowing screen, wrapped in blankets while ancient rivers drift quietly through their imagination. History often makes distant strangers feel surprisingly close together, like neighbors borrowing sugar and quietly forgetting the measuring cup forever. Now, slowly dim the lights. Perhaps turn on a fan, letting the steady hum of the air fill the room, and in that gentle rhythm, we quietly step into tonight's journey together. The plain before you feels unfinished in the gentlest possible way. Soft soil rests beneath shallow channels left behind by seasonal floods crossing the land. Long ago, near the end of the Pleistocene epoch, distant glaciers slowly retreat across northern mountains. Their melting feeds rivers wandering toward this basin, each movement unfolding patiently, like an elderly librarian returning books carefully onto dusty shelves. You walk beside marshlands glowing softly beneath moonlight while cool air drifts across still water. Thin reeds bend gently in the breeze, brushing together with whispers resembling paper lanterns, rustling outside a quiet restaurant after closing time. Tiny insects circle above the pools without sound. Nothing rushes here. Even the river moves lazily, uncertain where it wishes to travel tonight. Scientists studying sediment layers in modern Iraq discovered that these rivers once deposited enormous amounts of nutrient-rich silt across the floodplain. Each flood quietly leaves behind fresh minerals carried from mountains hundreds of miles away. Over centuries, the soil becomes dark, fertile, and surprisingly deep. You can almost imagine the land breathing beneath your feet, slowly preparing itself for seeds, villages, and futures nobody could possibly predict beneath these ancient stars. The southern marshes stretch endlessly into darkness, broken only by narrow islands of firmer ground rising above shallow water. Pelicans glide silently overhead while fish disturb the surface below. Distant bird calls echo through the reeds with slow repetition, resembling someone testing an old microphone before a midnight radio broadcast. The sound feels comforting, steady enough to quiet your thoughts beside the moving water tonight. During this age, humans already travel through parts of the Fertile Crescent, though permanent settlements remain uncommon across the southern plains. Small groups follow seasonal resources, gathering wild grains and fishing beside riverbanks throughout the year. Archaeologists later uncovered traces of campsites near ancient water sources. Survival unfolds quietly here through careful routines repeated beneath changing skies, drifting winds, and slowly passing seasons. As dawn approaches, pale light spreads across the floodplain like milk slowly poured into dark tea. The rivers reflect copper and silver, while mist rises gently from the wetlands. Silence feels calm rather than empty, surrounding the marshes with soft stillness, much like heavy blankets settling across a bed during cold winter evenings after warmth finally arrives. The climate remains softer than the harsher deserts that later surround Mesopotamia. Seasonal rains feed grasses and wetland plants across the lowlands each year. Ancient pollen studies suggest this region once held far richer vegetation than modern landscapes reveal today. You can almost smell damp earth beneath the reeds, carrying minerals dissolved from distant mountains into the rivers below. You continue beside a narrow water channel where smooth mud reflects the brightening sky overhead. Tiny fish move beneath the surface while dragonflies hover above the reeds without sound. Somewhere nearby, unseen animals cross carefully through tall grasses. The landscape feels balanced and untouched, free from kingdoms, walls, armies, or taxes waiting patiently like forgotten parking tickets beneath windshield wipers. Far upstream, melting snow continues feeding the Tigris and Euphrates from mountain ranges in modern eastern Turkey. The rivers travel immense distances before reaching these southern plains, carrying clay, minerals, and fragments of stone through valleys and bends. Over centuries, their flooding patterns slowly shape Mesopotamia itself. Land and water create one another together, like musicians learning the same melody through repetition. You pause beside a quiet inlet where reeds sway gently beneath the cooling evening air. Faint animal footprints remain pressed into the mud near the water's edge. Many generations later, people will build canals and cities across these wetlands using sun-dried brick. Tonight, however, the plain remains untouched. The silence feels ancient and complete, like forgotten letters resting quietly inside wooden drawers for decades. As darkness returns, the rivers settle beneath a sky crowded with brilliant stars untouched by smoke or torchlight. Their reflections shimmer softly across the water while cool wind moves through the marsh grass. Somewhere beyond the horizon, future civilizations already sleep invisibly beneath the soil. For now, only the rivers continue flowing southward, carrying moonlight across the quiet plain before cities begin dreaming. Morning arrives slowly across the southern marshlands, spreading pale golden light over endless reeds beside shallow channels. You move quietly along narrow paths of damp earth where some of Mesopotamia's earliest settled communities begin shaping lives beside dependable water. The air smells of wet clay and river plants. Somewhere nearby, a bird complains loudly enough to resemble an irritated neighbor searching for missing keys. The people living here rarely build with stone because little stone exists across these low southern plains. Instead, they shape soft river mud into rectangular bricks and leave them beneath the hot sun to dry. Walls rise gradually from the earth itself, carrying the same dusty color as surrounding ground. Entire villages seem to emerge naturally from the floodplain beside the rivers. You walk beside small homes built from mud brick, reinforced with bundles of reeds gathered from nearby marshes. Their flat roofs rest beneath open skies, releasing heat after long daylight hours. Archaeologists later uncover woven reed mats inside ancient foundations. It feels comforting imagining families gathering at sunset while smoke drifts softly through the warm evening air. The daytime heat settles heavily across the plain, pressing against the land with slow persistence throughout summer months. Temperatures rise high enough to dry shallow puddles before midday arrives. Yet after sunset, cool air slips quietly through reeds and across narrow canals. The rhythm feels calm and predictable, like an old shopkeeper opening every morning without ever needing an alarm clock nearby. Small irrigation channels begin appearing beside the villages, guiding river water toward fertile fields. You hear water slipping softly through narrow cuts in the soil beneath distant bird calls overhead. Early farmers slowly learn to cooperate with seasonal flooding rather than resist it. Their patience resembles gardeners tending fragile balcony plants while quietly worrying about tomorrow's uncertain weather. By around 5400 BCE, one settlement near the southern marshes quietly grows larger than many surrounding communities. Today, archaeologists call this place Eridu, often considered one of the oldest cities in Mesopotamian history. Ancient Sumerian tradition later describes it as the first city granted kingship by the gods. Yet standing here now, you notice nothing grand or dramatic. The settlement feels humble, shaped mostly by mud, water, reeds, and patient human repetition. At the center of Eridu, workers slowly build temple platforms from layered mud brick beside the settlement. Over generations, newer temples rise directly above older foundations, creating stacked structures like pages gathering inside a buried book. Archaeologists later uncover many construction levels beneath the site. Time settles gently here, adding quiet layers like blankets folded carefully each winter. You drift through reed marshes surrounding the settlement while dragonflies hover above still pools glowing beneath afternoon light. Fishermen guide narrow boats through shallow water using long wooden poles pressed carefully into the mud. Their movements appear calm and practiced after generations beside these wetlands. Somewhere nearby, someone probably burns dinner over a cooking fire, as humans consistently do. The marshlands provide nearly everything needed for daily life throughout the settlement. Reeds become roofs, baskets, fences, sleeping mats, and lightweight boats sealed carefully with bitumen. Fish fill the waterways while birds nest among thick grasses beside the shore. Geological evidence suggests these wetlands once covered much of southern Mesopotamia, supporting human settlement with quiet abundance beside the rivers. As evening approaches, the villages settle into softer rhythms beneath fading sunlight and warm skies. Smoke rises gently from cooking fires, while distant voices drift through cooling air. Mud brick walls release heat gathered during the day, creating warmth after sunset. You can almost imagine someone beneath a reed roof, hoping tomorrow's weather feels slightly less exhausting. The people here begin cultivating barley and emmer wheat beside fertile riverbanks nourished by seasonal flooding. Archaeological discoveries reveal grinding stones, clay storage bins, and primitive farming tools throughout early Mesopotamian settlements. Agriculture arrives gradually rather than dramatically, unfolding through ordinary observations repeated carefully across generations beneath changing skies, drifting winds, and the quiet movement of nearby rivers. You walk beside narrow canals where water reflects pale moonlight between clusters of reeds. Frogs murmur softly from the shallows, while distant birds settle into the marshes for nightfall. The villages remain small, yet shared labor already shapes daily survival. Irrigation requires patience and cooperation. Even these early communities learn water rarely follows personal schedules or convenient plans. The temple at Eridu gradually becomes more than a religious structure beside the water. It serves as a gathering place where food supplies, labor, and seasonal responsibilities are organized within the growing settlement. Historians later believe these temples helped form Mesopotamia's earliest administrative foundations. Tonight, however, the building glows quietly beneath cooling skies beside calm canals and firelit reeds. Across the floodplain, scattered communities continue forming beside dependable water sources and fertile soil left after seasonal floods. Villages emerge wherever irrigation remains manageable throughout the year. The landscape slowly becomes a network of connected settlements linked by rivers and canals. Civilization arrives gently, beginning with repeated mornings beside flowing water and carefully tended grain fields. Night settles softly across the marshes while cool wind moves through tall reeds with a sound resembling distant rainfall. You pause beside a canal where water flows quietly between smooth banks shaped carefully by human hands. Somewhere beyond the darkness, future cities already wait inside these villages. For now, only mud walls, cooking fires, and patient routines support urban life. Archaeologists studying Eridu later uncover evidence showing the settlement remains occupied for thousands of years through changing climates and shifting political eras. Layer upon layer of human activity gathers beneath the soil until the city itself becomes memory preserved within clay. Ordinary actions, repeated long enough, eventually leave marks surviving far beyond vanished civilizations and forgotten rulers. The night sky reflects faintly across calm irrigation channels beside sleeping villages and dark reeds moving beneath cool wind. Water continues its endless journey through the plain while communities slowly learn how to remain rooted in one place. Somewhere within that quiet trust, beneath stars mirrored softly upon dark canals, the first heartbeat of Mesopotamian civilization quietly begins. Morning sunlight spreads across the canals of southern Sumer, while cool mist lingers softly above the water. You stand beside carefully measured irrigation channels cut through dark soil by generations of patient workers. Wooden stakes and stretched ropes help guide straight waterways across the floodplain. Everything feels deliberate and calm, organized with quiet and deeply satisfying precision. The canals carry river water gently toward barley fields beneath the warming sky. Men and women walk slowly along embankments, inspecting gates woven from reeds and packed mud. The irrigation system depends upon cooperation rather than urgency. Every family understands when water must be diverted and when repairs become necessary, though somebody probably still complains about a missing borrowed shovel. The Sumerians learned to observe the rhythms of the Tigris and Euphrates with extraordinary care through generations of farming. Seasonal floods arrive not as surprises, but as repeating cycles shaping everyday life across the plain. Nutrient-rich silt spreads across farmland before waters retreat again. The rivers seem to breathe slowly across the land beneath calm and patient skies. You walk beside a narrow embankment while workers strengthen canal walls using baskets packed carefully with clay. The air smells faintly of wet soil, warming beneath morning sunlight. In the distance, oxen pull wooden plows through prepared fields. Nothing moves quickly here. Life beside these waterways values repetition and consistency, flowing steadily like water dripping from a repaired faucet at night. Archaeologists studying ancient Sumerian settlements uncover evidence of sophisticated irrigation systems dating back thousands of years. Canals branch across the floodplain like veins carrying water through the body of the land itself. Some waterways stretch for miles beneath open skies. The engineering feels practical rather than grand, designed simply to keep grain growing through changing seasons. As afternoon heat settles across the fields, farmers rest beneath woven reed shelters beside the canals. Clay jars filled with cool water stand nearby, while dragonflies drift lazily above the surface. The landscape hums softly with insects and distant birds hidden among marsh grasses. Human routines depend deeply upon water levels here, much like modern lives depending entirely upon coffee machines. The irrigation networks require careful measurement because uneven water distribution could damage crops or flood nearby settlements. Workers use ropes, measuring rods, and simple surveying methods to maintain balanced canal depths throughout the region. Historians believe specialized laborers oversee much of this planning within early Sumerian society. Despite the complexity, the canals still blend peacefully into the surrounding floodplain. You pass broad barley fields shimmering beneath afternoon sunlight, while irrigation water glides through narrow channels cut carefully into the earth. The grain bends gently with the breeze in rolling movements, resembling waves crossing a calm inland sea. Nearby, children laugh beside the water while adults repair embankments before evening. Life feels repetitive here in the most comforting and familiar way. Many clay tablets created during later Sumerian periods survive into the modern world because baked earth preserves writing remarkably well through time. Some records list barley harvests, irrigation schedules, labor assignments, and water distribution carefully across farming districts. These tablets become echoes of ordinary lives rather than dramatic monuments, resembling ancient grocery lists forgotten quietly inside museum drawers for thousands of years. As the sun lowers westward, long shadows stretch across irrigation channels while workers slowly return toward nearby settlements. Water continues moving steadily through the canals, reflecting pale golden light beneath the evening sky. The sound feels deeply calming after the day's heat. Reliable water brings reliable harvests, allowing entire communities to rest more peacefully beneath the stars each night. Temples and administrative buildings gradually emerge beside the largest canal networks, helping organize labor and oversee grain storage throughout growing settlements. Priests and officials monitor agricultural cycles closely because successful irrigation supports urban life across Sumer. Historians later connect these systems to organized government, though tonight the process feels gradual, unfolding through quiet decisions repeated beside flowing water. The climate remains harsh during daylight hours, especially through long summers when heat shimmers above canals like transparent cloth. Yet evening eventually softens the landscape each day. Cool breezes drift across the water after sunset, while frogs begin their nightly chorus beyond cultivated fields. Even the weather follows predictable patterns here, though the wind occasionally behaves like a stubborn cat ignoring instructions. You pause beside a storage building where clay jars filled with grain stand carefully stacked against mud brick walls. Nearby, scribes press wedge-shaped symbols into damp tablets while recording barley deliveries from surrounding farms. Cuneiform writing develops partly because irrigation societies require detailed records. Water, crops, labor, and taxes all become measurable things organized carefully beneath dusty evening skies. The canals also create pathways between communities scattered throughout southern Mesopotamia. Boats carrying grain, fish, reeds, and pottery travel slowly through waterways, linking distant settlements together. Trade grows naturally from the river system itself. You can imagine travelers drifting through these channels at dusk, while lantern light flickers across calm water and mosquitoes continue their ancient campaign against humanity. Generations pass beside these irrigation networks with relatively little disruption compared to later periods of Mesopotamian history. Predictable agricultural cycles encourage stability across many regions of Sumer. Fields are planted, canals repaired, grain harvested, and records preserved year after year. Time itself seems slower beside the water, allowing communities to settle deeply into routines shaped by changing seasons. The evening air cools gradually while soft wind moves through tall barley fields surrounding the canals. Reflections shimmer across still water beneath fading orange light. Workers walk home slowly along embankments carrying tools worn smooth through years of use. Somewhere beyond the horizon, future empires already wait inside the systems these communities quietly create beside the rivers tonight. As sunset deepens into twilight, the canals mirror the darkening sky between endless stretches of grain. The sound of moving water softens, while distant birds settle into reeds for the night. Clay tablets dry quietly inside nearby buildings, preserving records of barley and irrigation for thousands of years. Evening clouds drift slowly above peaceful Sumerian fields beside calm, reflective water. Night arrives slowly over the cities of Uruk and Lagash, while warm air lingers above the canals long after sunset. You walk through narrow streets lined with mud brick walls, glowing softly beneath flickering oil lamps. Somewhere ahead, temple courtyards remain awake with quiet activity as scribes continue recording harvests and deliveries deep into the evening. The city hums gently beneath the stars, rather like an apartment building where somebody always decides midnight is the perfect time to reorganize furniture. Inside the temple complex, the scent of burning sesame oil drifts through cool corridors built from thick clay walls. Scribes sit cross-legged beside low wooden tables, while soft lamplight flicker across damp clay tablets, waiting to receive fresh marks. Reed styluses press carefully into the surface with tiny rhythmic sounds resembling delicate tapping against a window during light rain. Every movement feels patient here, measured carefully like hands adjusting the gears of an old clock. By around 3200 BCE, Sumerian writing begins developing across southern Mesopotamia, especially within large urban centers such as Uruk. Historians believe early writing first emerges mainly for administrative purposes rather than storytelling or poetry. Temples need accurate records of grain, labor, livestock, and irrigation schedules. Civilization slowly becomes too large to trust entirely to memory. Even ancient accountants discover that relying on recollection alone can become surprisingly dangerous near tax season. You move deeper into the temple, where shelves of drying clay tablets line the walls beneath dim lantern light. Some tablets list barley rations distributed to workers repairing canals and public buildings. Others record livestock numbers or grain deliveries from nearby farms. The information repeats across generations, preserving the quiet heartbeat of organized society carefully within clay like pressed flowers hidden inside forgotten books. Outside the temple, canals reflect pale moonlight, while distant frogs murmur from the marshes beyond the city walls. Boats drift slowly through the waterways, carrying grain and reeds beneath the stars. The entire urban world depends upon systems remaining predictable and balanced. Water must arrive where needed. Harvests must be counted properly. Labor must be organized carefully. Society flows through administration the same way rivers flow through irrigation channels, steady and almost hypnotically calm. The scribes trained for years to master cuneiform writing, learning hundreds of wedge-shaped signs pressed carefully into wet clay using sharpened reed tools. Their work demands patience and precision beneath flickering lamps. You can almost imagine a tired apprentice smudging an entire tablet moments before completion, proving workplace frustration survives every century with remarkable consistency. The temple complexes at Uruk and Lagash function not only as religious centers, but also as administrative hubs coordinating agriculture, labor, and trade throughout surrounding regions. Priests oversee food storage, while officials monitor irrigation networks beside the rivers. Historians later recognize these institutions as early urban governments, though tonight the temples feel calm and quietly reassuring beside dark canals. You pause beside an open courtyard where cool evening wind stirs hanging reed mats outside a record chamber. Young scribes carry baskets filled with damp tablets waiting to dry overnight beneath sheltered roofs. The air smells faintly of clay, smoke, and river water. Somewhere nearby, somebody drops pottery loudly enough to briefly disturb ancient Mesopotamia's otherwise impressive atmosphere of professionalism. The city of Uruk grows enormously during this era, becoming one of the ancient world's largest urban centers. Archaeological evidence suggests tens of thousands may live there during its height. Massive temple structures rise above surrounding neighborhoods, while canals connect districts across the floodplain. Yet daily life still revolves around routines. Grain gets counted, water flows, lamps burn quietly each evening. Inside one chamber, a senior scribe records barley allocations intended for canal workers repairing embankments before flood season returns. Each wedge pressed into clay represents practical information connected directly to survival and stability. Writing remains tied closely to physical life here. Cuneiform tablets function much like ancient spreadsheets, though far heavier and considerably less likely to freeze unexpectedly. You continue through the temple while distant chanting echoes softly from inner sanctuaries dedicated to gods associated with water and fertility. Oil lamps flicker against plastered walls beneath rising smoke and fading paint. Outside, countless stars shine above the floodplain. Religion, agriculture, labor, and administration all move together tonight in slow rhythm like reeds woven carefully into strong baskets. Many surviving Sumerian tablets discovered by archaeologists contain ordinary records instead of dramatic royal declarations or military triumphs. Some document beer production, livestock exchanges, or grain deliveries measured with remarkable detail. Historians often learn most about ancient life through these mundane records. Across thousands of years, ordinary routines still leave the clearest traces behind after civilizations quietly disappear. The evening deepens, while warm air gradually cools beside canals, threading through Lagash and Uruk beneath lantern light. Temple workers finish their duties before carrying completed tablets into storage rooms lined with wooden shelves. Clay hardens overnight, preserving another fragment of civilization against memory's erosion. Entire societies continue functioning because quiet individuals patiently complete repetitive tasks beneath drifting stars every night. You stand beside a canal where reflections of temple lamps shimmer softly across black water, moving almost too slowly to notice. Somewhere beyond the rooftops, barley fields wait beneath darkness for morning irrigation. The cities remain awake, though gently so. Administration itself becomes part of the landscape, flowing steadily through temples and streets like water beneath moonlit bridges. Historians later describe Mesopotamian civilization as one of humanity's earliest examples of urban organization supported through written administration and hydraulic engineering. Yet beside the canal tonight, the achievement feels deeply human rather than abstract. People simply attempt to maintain order around water, food, and time itself, leaving behind tablets, temples, and routines surviving beyond individual lifetimes. The stars grow brighter while smoke from oil lamps rises gently into cooling night air above temple roofs. Soft footsteps echo faintly through distant courtyards, while canals continue carrying dark water toward sleeping fields beyond the city. Somewhere inside storage rooms, rows of clay tablets dry quietly beneath darkness, while the peaceful Sumerian sky stretches endlessly with dust and starlight. The Euphrates moves differently now than it once did, though the change arrives so slowly that few people notice it at first. You stand beside a canal outside an aging Sumerian city, while water glides silently through narrower channels than before. The river has begun drifting westward across the floodplain over many generations. Its movement feels subtle and patient, like furniture gradually shifting across a wooden floor after years of people walking through the same quiet hallway. Some settlements that once rested comfortably beside active waterways now find themselves farther from dependable water sources. Irrigation canals grow longer as workers attempt to reconnect fields to the shifting river branches. The process demands constant maintenance beneath increasingly difficult conditions. Yet daily life continues calmly despite these adjustments. Farmers still rise before sunrise, repair embankments, and guide water toward barley fields, while quietly pretending everything remains entirely manageable, which feels wonderfully familiar across history. Geologists studying ancient sediment layers discover evidence that the Euphrates repeatedly changes course throughout Mesopotamian history. Flood deposits appear in some regions, while other areas gradually dry over centuries. Rivers naturally wander across flat floodplains, carving new channels while abandoning older paths behind them. Nothing about the transformation happens dramatically. The landscape simply rearranges itself very slowly beneath human settlements, much like a cat calmly occupying whichever chair somebody intended to use moments earlier. The southern plains remain fertile, though maintaining agriculture now requires greater coordination and labor than before. Canal systems expand farther outward from the rivers, while officials monitor water distribution with increasing care. You walk beside workers deepening irrigation ditches beneath harsh afternoon sunlight. Their movements appear practiced and unhurried, despite the growing challenges around them. Water still flows, crops still grow, and evenings still arrive softly across the marshes, carrying cool winds from the reeds. Toward the end of the 3rd millennium BCE, climate conditions across Mesopotamia begin shifting in noticeable ways. Modern studies using pollen, lake sediments, and dust deposits suggest regional drought affects agriculture during this era. Rainfall patterns change gradually while temperatures become less predictable. These pressures unfold slowly, like a season stretching across generations rather than a sudden catastrophe. You stand beside fields where barley bends weakly under dry wind sweeping across the plain. Farmers inspect cracked soil near canal edges, while oxen move slowly along dusty paths between settlements. The atmosphere feels tired rather than desperate. Life adapts quietly, season by season. Someone nearby blames the weather with the same exhausted tone used for traffic or broken air conditioners. The great rivers still flood each year, though less predictably than communities once expected. Some canals receive too little water, while others clog with silt carried from distant regions. Maintaining irrigation grows increasingly complex as conditions fluctuate. Yet Mesopotamian society adapts with experience. Survival depends on patient adjustment beside rivers that never remain still for long. In cities such as and Lagash, temple administrators and local rulers focus more closely on canal management as water access becomes politically significant. Clay tablets show concern with irrigation schedules, crop quotas, and boundary disputes. The tone remains practical rather than alarmed. Civilization responds not with panic, but with more measurements, more planning, and more clay tablets than anyone enjoys carrying. Evenings remain beautiful despite environmental change across the floodplain. Cool air drifts over canals after sunset, while reeds whisper beneath starlight. You walk beside water reflecting pale moonlight across dark fields. The landscape continues functioning, though differently than before. Change does not announce itself loudly here. Instead, it settles into routine until generations forget how different the past once was. Archaeologists later note that some urban centers shrink during prolonged drought, while others adapt through irrigation expansion and trade networks. Population shifts gradually as communities seek reliable water. Even abandoned settlements fade slowly. Mud brick walls erode beneath wind, while canals dry beside empty courtyards. History often disappears quietly, like dust settling across shelves rather than collapse under thunder. You pause beside an aging canal, lined with thick reeds growing along neglected edges. Water still moves gently, though slower than channels nearer the river's newer course. Workers discuss repairs beneath fading sunlight, while birds circle overhead. Humans normalize gradual change easily, especially when tomorrow still requires early waking to manage irrigation before afternoon heat returns. Shifting waterways also reshape trade routes linking cities across southern Mesopotamia. Boats that once moved efficiently between settlements now navigate complex channels formed by sediment and changing river paths. Merchants adapt, establishing new routes while older waterways grow shallow. Civilization adjusts continuously around environmental movement. Even economies behave like rivers, flowing toward whichever paths remain open long enough to follow. Inscriptions from later Sumerian rulers describe canal restoration projects and efforts to maintain agricultural stability during difficult periods. Leaders understand controlling water preserves food supplies and political influence. Yet surviving records remain measured rather than alarmed. Challenges feel ongoing and familiar instead of catastrophic. People continue repairing embankments beneath dusty skies because no realistic alternative truly exists for survival. As twilight spreads across the floodplain, silence returns quickly after the day's labor ends. Canals reflect fading orange light while warm wind moves through dry grasses. Workers finish reinforcing a damaged embankment before darkness arrives. Their slow movements blend into the landscape itself. Human effort and environmental change remain intertwined, moving together through centuries with quiet, persistent rhythm. Competition between neighboring city-states gradually deepens around shared irrigation systems across Sumer. Small disputes over canal maintenance, field boundaries, and seasonal water access grow increasingly significant under changing conditions. Yet tensions emerge slowly, almost invisibly. Rivalries form like rivers altering course through countless small adjustments repeated across years beneath cloudless, indifferent skies and steadily shifting landscapes. Night settles over the plain, while cool air moves through canals, stretching toward distant settlements hidden in darkness. Water continues flowing between fields, carrying faint reflections of scattered stars. The Euphrates shifts slowly through the land, unconcerned with borders or ambitions. Beside these waters, Mesopotamian cities begin watching one another more carefully beneath the calm and endless night. The borderlands between Lagash and Umma stretch quietly beneath the pale morning sky, while cool wind drifts across harvested fields. You walk beside irrigation canals that divide territories almost invisibly across the flat Sumerian plain. Nothing about the landscape immediately suggests conflict. Reeds sway gently beside shallow water, while distant birds circle above empty farmland. Yet beneath this calm surface, generations of disagreement slowly gather like fine dust settling unnoticed onto old furniture. The dispute between Lagash and Umma centers largely around water and fertile agricultural land connected to shared canal systems. Both city-states depend upon irrigation to support their growing populations, temples, and economies. Control over canals means control over harvests, labor, and survival itself. Yet the struggle rarely feels dramatic from a distance. Most days probably involve ordinary farmers checking water levels, while quietly resenting neighbors across the boundary for reasons nobody explains very clearly anymore. Stone boundary markers stand beside canals and field edges, placed to define territorial agreements between competing cities. Some inscriptions warn against violating borders or redirecting irrigation water. You pause beside a weathered marker buried in drifting sand. The stone feels tired rather than threatening, slowly leaning under centuries of wind, rain, and persistent plant roots. The fields surrounding these borders remain productive despite ongoing tensions between neighboring regions. Barley grows thick beside irrigation channels supported by carefully maintained embankments. Farmers continue planting, harvesting, and repairing canals regardless of political disputes nearby. Life persists through repetition more than certainty. Someone beyond the fields likely complains about water distribution using the same familiar tone heard everywhere else. Historical records suggest tensions between Lagash and Umma continue across multiple generations during the early dynastic period of Mesopotamian history. Rulers negotiate treaties, establish boundaries, and occasionally accuse one another of violating irrigation agreements tied to contested farmland. Yet the surviving inscriptions often feel administrative rather than emotional. Water management becomes inseparable from politics because geography itself demands cooperation and competition simultaneously beneath the same open and unforgiving sky. You walk slowly along a dry embankment where cracked mud reveals traces of older irrigation channels abandoned long ago. Warm wind moves through the empty fields carrying loose dust across the plain. The atmosphere feels strangely peaceful despite the history attached to this land. Human disagreements eventually fade into the landscape itself. The earth remembers canals, and floor clearly than speeches, victories, or angry declarations shouted beside temporary borders during moments of frustration. One surviving artifact connected to this conflict becomes especially famous thousands of years later. Historians call it the Stela of the Vultures, a carved stone monument created around 2450 BCE during the reign of Eannatum of Lagash. The stele depicts organized soldiers, defeated enemies, and vultures carrying away severed heads after battle. It remains one of humanity's earliest known historical records of warfare. Yet tonight, even that monument feels softened beneath the long silence of passing centuries. You imagine the stele standing beneath harsh sunlight beside a temple courtyard while dust settles slowly into its carved lines. The scenes upon its surface once likely appeared sharp and politically meaningful to contemporary viewers. Now the surviving fragments rest quietly inside museum collections, far removed from the canals they once described. Time transforms even violent imagery into archaeology eventually. History itself behaves rather like old paint, fading gently on buildings nobody bothers repainting, because the weather seems oddly sentimental about it. The irrigation systems linking Lagash and Umma continue shaping life across borderlands despite political tension. Water flows through shared canals during planting seasons, while workers maintain embankments damaged by floods or neglect. Communities depend on infrastructure that ignores territorial claims. The Euphrates and Tigris move according to seasonal rhythms, not agreements carved into stone centuries earlier. At sunset, harvested fields glow gold beneath cooling skies, while wind moves softly across stubble left after grain collection. Broken mud brick walls stand near abandoned canal paths slowly filling with sand and reeds. You hear distant water beyond fields, steady and calm despite generations of rivalry. The sound feels comforting, like an old fan continuing through forgotten arguments. Archaeologists studying Mesopotamian texts later find repeated references to canal disputes, boundary negotiations, and agricultural tensions between city-states. These records show how environmental management shapes politics across Sumer. Conflicts rarely last permanently. Alliances shift, borders move, leaders disappear. Only canals require constant attention, regardless of authority over land beneath drifting desert skies. You continue beside narrow waterways reflecting pale evening light while frogs murmur among reeds near banks. Ahead, workers reinforce an embankment damaged by flooding. Their labor appears ordinary rather than heroic. Civilizations survive through maintenance more than conquest. Even contested territories rely on daily canal repair, water measurement, and steady agricultural work beneath unchanging seasonal cycles. The stele of the vultures eventually breaks into fragments through erosion, burial, and centuries beneath shifting earth. Historians reconstruct pieces during 19th century excavations. Even victory monuments require restoration by strangers thousands of years later. It feels humbling. Memorials fade like forgotten photographs recovered from dusty attics, handled carefully after long neglect and quiet disappearance into time. As darkness settles across borderlands, cool air moves through cracked walls and abandoned irrigation ditches, stretching toward distant settlements. Active canals still carry water, while older channels dry beneath stars. You notice how temporary divisions appear from the landscape's view. Rivers shift across floodplains while winds erase footprints quickly after travelers pass through soft, unstable earth. City-states continue for generations, defending water and territory with varying success across political eras. Yet none remain permanent beneath slow river movement and climate change. Boundaries between Lagash and Umma blur through floods, erosion, and time. Geography resists human plans. Even maps become outdated, folded away beneath dust and fading memory across centuries. Night deepens over silent fields while stars shimmer above canals winding through darkness. Wind passes over stone markers smoothed by centuries near water. Beneath soil, fragments of treaties and monuments rest quietly. Across ancient Sumer, rivers continue their journey, softening every border until only water, sand, and silence remain beneath the endless sky. Morning mist drifts softly above the Euphrates, while long boats loaded with barley move quietly through the canals of Mesopotamia. You stand beside a crowded riverbank where merchants, laborers, and temple officials begin another ordinary day beneath pale sunlight. Somewhere beyond the southern cities of Sumer, a new political order slowly gathers shape. Yet nothing about the moment feels sudden. History changes here the same way rivers shift course, gradually and almost politely beneath open skies. Sargon of Akkad enters the historical record during the 24th century BCE, though many details about his early life remain uncertain beneath layers of legend and fragmented inscriptions. Later stories claim he once served as a cupbearer before rising to power. Whether true or not, the transition itself unfolds across a world already deeply connected by canals, trade routes, and administrative systems. Even empires require existing roads before they can arrive fashionably late to history. The cities of Sumer continue functioning much as they always have during these years. Farmers repair irrigation channels, while scribes record grain deliveries onto clay tablets drying beneath the sun. Temple courtyards remain filled with laborers sorting reeds, fish, and harvested barley beside canals. Yet political authority slowly extends beyond individual city-states toward broader networks of control. The process feels like neighboring households sharing one complicated water bill. You walk beside a river harbor where boats arrive carrying grain, wool, timber, and stone from distant regions tied increasingly into Akkadian administration. The waterways connecting Mesopotamia now support larger systems of coordination stretching across multiple cities and territories. Trade flows steadily beneath the watch of officials managing supplies and labor. The rivers themselves seem pleased by this arrangement, finally receiving recognition for functioning as ancient highways long before anyone invents traffic complaints or roadside diners. Historians often describe the Akkadian Empire as one of the world's first true empires because it unites numerous city-states and regions beneath centralized rule. Sargon's influence eventually stretches across much of Mesopotamia and beyond, linking diverse populations through administration, trade, and military authority. Yet standing beside these rivers tonight, the transformation feels almost organic. The canals already connect the land physically. Political unity simply follows pathways. Water has quietly traced for generations beneath the soil. The cities remain active and familiar despite changing leadership. In markets beside canals, merchants weigh barley while potters shape clay vessels beneath reed shelters blocking afternoon sun. Children run through dusty streets between amber mud brick walls. Daily life rarely pauses for politics. People still worry about harvests, water access, and whether dinner bread will satisfy polite expectations. Sargon establishes Akkad as the center of his growing empire, though its exact location remains unknown today. Archaeologists still debate where it once stood, since no confirmed ruins have been found. The capital disappears so completely that scholars search beneath rivers, fields, and desert soil. Entire cities can vanish quietly over centuries, like socks lost in laundry rooms. The empire relies heavily on river transport across Mesopotamia because waterways move grain and goods efficiently between settlements. You watch wooden boats glide south carrying barley sacks beneath woven covers. Oars dip rhythmically into dark water reflecting evening skies. Movement feels calm and repetitive. Civilization expands not through speed, but through countless small journeys along familiar river currents. Administrative systems grow increasingly complex under Akkadian rule. Officials manage taxation, labor, and agricultural production across territories linked by canals and roads. Clay tablets record grain shipments, livestock counts, and resource distribution in careful detail. Writing serves practical needs above all else. Empires like irrigation systems depend on records. Somewhere, an exhausted scribe dreams of simpler work with fewer numbers and lighter burdens. As evening approaches, warm wind moves across fields surrounding canals, while distant temple towers darken against fading skies. Workers unload cargo beside riverbanks as lanterns glow softly across city streets. The empire feels vast yet quiet. Its strength rests in systems linking water, agriculture, labor, and trade beneath river-shaped order flowing outward gradually. The Akkadian language spreads alongside administrative authority across Mesopotamia during this era, though Sumerian traditions continue influencing urban life deeply. Cultures blend rather than disappear under imperial structure. Temples remain active, canals require maintenance, farmers plant with seasonal floods. Change arrives through layering, like fresh plaster applied carefully over older walls, still supporting entire structures beneath accumulated dust. You pause beside a riverside warehouse where laborers stack grain jars in cooling evening air. Officials press cylinder seals into wet clay to secure shipments for distant cities. Each carved seal creates repeating impressions when rolled. Lions, gods, animals, and ceremonial scenes appear in miniature. The designs feel elegant despite serving practical accounting purposes for barley and trade. Archaeologists later discovered thousands of cylinder seals across Mesopotamia, revealing detailed artistry preserved on tiny carved surfaces. Many belong to officials and merchants working within Akkadian administrative systems. Despite importance, seals remain personal tools carried through daily routines. History often survives through practical objects rather than monuments, which feels reassuring for anyone frequently misplacing everyday items. Night settles across river cities while boats drift through dark canals beneath scattered lantern reflections. Musicians play softly inside temple courtyards while scribes finish records before rest. The empire hums quietly around you, vast yet gentle. Water connects everything here, carrying grain, messages, officials, and ideas between settlements bound by currents older than kings or political borders. Sargon gradually becomes a legendary figure in later Mesopotamian tradition, remembered as conqueror and organizer of lands beyond earlier city-state boundaries. Yet legends soften into stories repeated beside fires and temple walls. Time reduces rulers into echoes within surviving texts. Rivers continue flowing with indifference toward human titles, moving steadily through fields beneath stars and cooling night air. In the final glow of evening, you watch a craftsman roll a cylinder, seal across fresh clay beside the canal. Tiny figures emerge under lamplight with smooth motion, while river water whispers nearby. Warehouses, boats, and temples settle into darkness. The empire breathes through records, water, and trade after sunset. Wet clay holds impressions like memory itself beneath Akkad's fading golden light. The fields of southern Mesopotamia still stretch wide beneath the morning sun, though something subtle has begun changing within the soil itself. You walk beside irrigation canals where thin white traces now appear along the edges of drying earth after floodwaters retreat. At first, the difference seems almost invisible. The land continues producing grain. Farmers continue their routines. Yet beneath centuries of irrigation, salt slowly gathers within the ground like quiet dust settling onto forgotten shelves. The rivers feeding Mesopotamian agriculture carry not only fertile sediment from distant mountains, but also small amounts of dissolved minerals. Over countless irrigation cycles, especially beneath intense heat and evaporation, salts gradually remain behind inside the soil after water disappears. The process unfolds with extraordinary patience. No single season feels disastrous. Instead, the landscape changes grain by grain. Much like a carpet slowly fading in sunlight, nobody notices until years have quietly passed. You kneel beside a canal embankment while warm wind drifts across nearby barley fields, moving softly beneath pale daylight. The earth feels dry and slightly brittle beneath your hands. Farmers working nearby continue clearing irrigation channels and checking water gates with practiced calm. They understand the land intimately through observation rather than theory. Somewhere among them, somebody almost certainly insists the harvest looked better 20 years ago, which historians eventually discover is a remarkably timeless human tradition. Archaeologists and environmental historians studying Mesopotamian agriculture later uncover evidence that soil salinity becomes an increasing challenge across southern regions over many centuries. Ancient records reveal declining wheat production in certain areas during the late 3rd millennium BCE. Crops begin responding differently to irrigation patterns that once sustained abundant harvests. Yet even this environmental pressure arrives quietly. Civilization adjusts gradually instead of collapsing overnight beneath dramatic storms or sudden catastrophe. Wheat, once widely cultivated throughout Sumerian agriculture, proves especially sensitive to rising soil salinity. Barley, however, tolerates salt conditions far more effectively. Over time, Mesopotamian farmers increasingly shift toward barley cultivation as environmental conditions continue evolving across the floodplain. Historians later identify this transition clearly through surviving agricultural tablets and harvest records. Adaptation here feels deeply practical rather than emotional, like switching shoes during a long walk because the weather politely refuses to cooperate anymore. You walk through fields where barley now grows more commonly than wheat beneath shimmering afternoon heat. The grain bends gently in the wind, while irrigation water moves slowly through narrow channels beside the crops. Farmers continue harvesting, storing, and distributing food, much as earlier generations once did. Life persists through adjustment rather than resistance. Human societies rarely survive because conditions remain perfect. They survive because people quietly learn how to continue anyway beneath changing skies. The canals themselves still appear beautiful despite environmental strain developing within the soil. Water reflects soft blue light between reeds growing thick along embankments, while birds circle overhead searching for fish. Small salt deposits shimmer beside fields after irrigation water evaporates in summer sun. The effect resembles frost scattered across earth, while warm air makes distant breezes feel strangely generous. Ancient Mesopotamian administrators continue recording harvest yields and irrigation schedules onto clay tablets throughout centuries of gradual agricultural change. Some texts note declining productivity, while others track shifts in crop distribution. Yet records remain calm and methodical. Civilization responds to environmental pressure through measurement, organization, and persistence. Even ancient bureaucracies believe careful paperwork can improve almost any situation over time. As evening approaches, workers guide boats loaded with barley sacks through canals linking scattered settlements beneath fading sunlight. Trade continues, temples remain active, and cities persist beside rivers despite changing water and soil conditions. Nothing suggests collapse. Instead, Mesopotamia enters long adaptation, shaped by environmental realities unfolding slowly across generations rather than single lifetimes. You pause beside a storage courtyard where grain jars stand stacked against mud brick walls warmed by late afternoon light. Nearby scribes record barley shipments while laborers rest beside shaded canals. The atmosphere feels calm despite agricultural adjustments. Most historical change occurs this way, through ordinary people continuing routine work while society shifts almost invisibly beneath them. Scientists study pollen, sediment cores, and irrigation remains to understand salinity's effects on Mesopotamian agriculture. Their findings show a landscape shaped by interaction between human engineering and environmental limits. The land does not reject civilization suddenly. Instead, it requires patience, flexibility, and crop choices that survive increasingly mineral-rich soil and intense southern sunlight over time. Evenings remain peaceful across the floodplain while cool air drifts through canals after sunset. Frogs murmur among reeds while cooking fires glow near villages beyond fields. Farmers return home with worn tools. No dramatic despair appears here. Humans adapt when change arrives slowly, like adjusting gradually to distant trains passing outside an apartment window at night. In southern regions, abandoned fields appear where salinity becomes too severe for cultivation. Elsewhere, communities adapt through improved irrigation and barley production. Mesopotamian civilization remains dynamic, reshaping itself across centuries. The land changes, and people change with it. There is tenderness in this relationship, even when survival requires accepting limitations beneath a bright, unyielding sky overhead. You walk beside a canal where moonlight reflects across dark water flowing between salt-dusted fields. The air cools after sunset while birds settle into marshes. Workers finish repairing irrigation gates before resting. Their efforts feel small but essential. Civilizations endure because ordinary people solve quiet, practical problems repeatedly, one evening at a time beneath shifting skies. Barley eventually replaces wheat as the clearest example of adaptation in ancient Mesopotamia. Communities reorganize around crops suited to altered floodplain conditions. Historians see resilience rather than failure. Rivers still provide life, soil still offers possibility. Civilization learns new rhythms beneath an endless sky filled with drifting dust, soft stars, and quiet, persistent wind. Night settles over fields while moonlight spreads across canals and barley. Salt traces shimmer faintly like frost along the earth. Warm wind moves through grain while rivers continue their journey southward. Beneath the calm Mesopotamian night, pale salt upon the fields glows softly like a delicate veil resting over the ancient land. Evening settles softly across Babylon, while warm wind drifts through gardens fed by quiet irrigation channels branching from the Euphrates. You walk along broad streets paved with baked brick, still holding the heat of the fading day. Somewhere beyond the temple walls, water moves gently through shaded courtyards beneath palms and flowering plants. The city feels immense, yet strangely calm tonight, rather like a grand hotel finally becoming peaceful after a very long and unnecessarily complicated conference. Babylon rises gradually into prominence during the reign of Hammurabi in the 18th century BCE, becoming one of the most influential cities in Mesopotamian history. The city stands along the Euphrates, surrounded by canals, walls, temples, workshops, and crowded neighborhoods, tied together through trade and administration. Yet despite its growing power, Babylon remains deeply connected to the same rivers shaping earlier civilizations for thousands of years beneath the endless and dust-filled sky. You pass through market streets where merchants slowly close wooden stalls while lanterns begin glowing beneath shaded arcades. The smell of bread, dates, oil, and river water lingers softly in the cooling evening air. Traders count remaining goods beside woven baskets filled with grain and pottery. Nearby, someone argues gently over prices, with such patient determination that you suspect bargaining itself may actually be considered a respected recreational activity throughout the city after sunset. At the center of Babylonian administration stands one of the ancient world's most famous legal monuments, the Code of Hammurabi. The laws are carved onto a tall black basalt stele beneath an image of Hammurabi receiving authority from the sun god Shamash. Historians later recognized the inscription as one of humanity's earliest surviving legal codes. Yet tonight, beneath soft lantern light, the monument feels less intimidating than thoughtful, created not only to punish but to organize a complicated society calmly. The code itself addresses matters deeply connected to everyday life within Mesopotamia. It regulates trade, irrigation responsibilities, property disputes, labor agreements, and agricultural obligations across the kingdom. Water management remains especially important because canals continue supporting farms, transport, and urban stability throughout the region. Laws become another method of guiding flow through civilization itself. In many ways, governments function remarkably like plumbing systems, mostly unnoticed until something suddenly leaks through the ceiling at midnight. You walk beside a quiet canal where the reflection of nearby buildings trembles softly across dark water beneath the rising moon. Gardens line portions of the riverbanks, filled with date palms and shaded resting areas, cooled by irrigation channels running beneath stone walkways. The atmosphere feels orderly without becoming rigid. Babylon seeks balance rather than perfection. Even its laws acknowledge that human beings remain unpredictable creatures, despite everyone's sincere efforts to appear organized during official ceremonies and tax collection seasons. The city streets glow amber beneath rows of oil lamps, while temple towers rise dark against the deepening blue sky. Babylonian builders use kiln-fired bricks extensively throughout the city, allowing walls and roads to endure longer than earlier mud brick structures alone. Some surfaces shine faintly beneath glazed coatings, reflecting evening light. You can almost hear distant footsteps echoing along the paved streets while merchants carry final shipments towards storage houses near the river docks before sleep. Hammurabi's reign eventually unites much of Mesopotamia under Babylonian control through diplomacy, warfare, and administrative organization. Yet from within the city tonight, political authority feels less dramatic than practical. Officials record grain supplies. Canal workers repair embankments. Traders move goods between districts connected through waterways and roads. Civilization continues functioning through routines repeated daily across generations. Even empires spend surprisingly large amounts of time solving logistical problems involving transportation schedules and missing inventory records. The famous blue gates associated with Babylon belong mainly to later centuries under Nebuchadnezzar II, yet earlier Babylon already shows monumental architecture and broad walls. Travelers approaching from the river see rising towers before reaching harbor districts. The sight feels reassuring after long travel through dusty landscapes under harsh sunlight. You continue through quieter neighborhoods where families gather on rooftops, cooling beneath night air. Children drift toward sleep while distant musicians play softly behind mud brick walls. Water flows through canals reflecting stars between homes. The city breathes slowly, shaped by meals, labor, and conversations, repeated beneath familiar constellations each season. Archaeologists later uncover thousands of Babylonian tablets, preserving contracts, letters, and legal disputes from Hammurabi's era. Most records concern ordinary matters like debts, grain, and property. Human continuity feels striking across millennia. People still devote enormous effort to paperwork, misunderstandings, and carefully structured agreements, showing how familiar daily complexity truly is. The Euphrates flows beside Babylon, shaping its economy and layout. Bridges, canals, docks, and irrigation channels connect neighborhoods across the city. Boats carrying grain move slowly beneath walls at dusk. Water remains the foundation of Babylonian life. Without it, the city would fade into empty ruins under desert wind and silence. At night, warm air carries scents of river mud and gardens through Babylon's streets. Lantern light flickers on brick surfaces while the city feels stable under stars. Yet history knows cities eventually weaken through rivers, empires, and erosion. Everything built beside water slowly returns to dust across passing centuries. You pause near a courtyard where laws once echoed through gathered citizens. Nearby, water flows through stone channels feeding moonlit gardens. The sound feels eternal yet fragile. Babylon exists within time like everything else. Walls, laws, and monuments all drift toward silence as dust and memory accumulate across centuries. Historians later uncover Babylon beneath layers of sand and collapsed brick across the Iraqi plain. The city survives in fragments, inscriptions, and reconstructed ruins studied centuries later. Time is not cruel. Cities rise, flourish, and return to earth again, like campfires fading into ash after long conversations beneath the night sky. The moon rises above Babylon, while canals reflect dark water through silent gardens and streets. Oil lamps dim beside temple walls as wind moves across the Euphrates. Scribes finish records before rest. Beneath the vast Mesopotamian sky, Babylon begins its quiet return to dust beneath endless desert stars. The rivers continue flowing southward through Mesopotamia, while centuries pass quietly across the floodplain like slow-moving shadows beneath evening clouds. You stand beside the Tigris, watching boats drift through waters that have carried Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, and now Assyrians across the same ancient routes. Kingdoms rise and fade beside these currents with remarkable regularity. The landscape remains patient throughout it all, rather like an old librarian calmly watching generations of noisy students eventually grow tired and leave. Assyria gradually expands across northern Mesopotamia, building cities filled with temples, palaces, and administrative centers connected through roads and river trade. Yet even as imperial authority changes hands repeatedly, daily rhythms continue beneath familiar skies. Farmers still guide water into canals. Merchants still count grain shipments beside crowded docks. Scribes still press symbols into clay. History often feels dramatic when summarized quickly, though living through it probably resembles attending endless meetings with slightly different banners hanging on the walls. You walk through the great city of Nineveh during the later Assyrian period, while warm sunlight reflects softly from pale stone buildings rising above the riverbanks. Broad avenues lead toward palace complexes decorated with carved reliefs showing kings, animals, and distant campaigns. Yet beyond the monuments, ordinary life hums quietly through workshops, kitchens, gardens, and marketplaces. Somewhere nearby, somebody almost certainly burns bread while blaming the oven instead of acknowledging deeply preventable personal decisions. The Assyrian kings become famous for their military strength and vast territorial control stretching across much of the Near East. Yet their empire also depends heavily upon administration, communication, and knowledge preserved carefully within archives and libraries. One of the most remarkable collections eventually forms under King Ashurbanipal during the 7th century BCE. His library at Nineveh gathers thousands of clay tablets containing literature, religious texts, astronomy, medicine, mathematics, and royal correspondence from across Mesopotamian civilization. Inside the library chambers, cool darkness protects rows of clay tablets stacked carefully upon shelves and stored inside large rooms built from stone and mud brick. You move quietly through narrow corridors while faint dust drifts through thin beams of sunlight entering high windows above. The air smells dry and ancient. Thousands of written voices rest silently here together. The atmosphere feels oddly peaceful, like entering a bookstore where every customer has finally agreed to whisper without needing passive-aggressive reminder signs posted nearby. The tablets themselves preserve stories far older than the Assyrian Empire. Scribes copy ancient Sumerian myths, Akkadian epics, religious hymns, and astronomical observations onto fresh clay generations after their original composition. Among these texts survives the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of humanity's oldest literary works. Yet for centuries after Nineveh falls, the stories remain buried beneath earth and silence. Entire worlds of memory sleep quietly underground, while rivers continue flowing beside ruined cities forgotten by time. The Neo-Babylonian Empire later rises after the decline of Assyria, bringing Babylon once again into prominence beneath rulers such as Nebuchadnezzar II. Massive walls, temples, canals, and ceremonial gates transform the city into one of the ancient world's most celebrated capitals. Yet the transition between empires unfolds gradually from the perspective of ordinary people living beside the rivers. Water still requires management. Fields still need planting. Civilization continues through routines more than declarations of political destiny beneath the wide Mesopotamian sky. You walk beside Babylonian canals at dusk, while traders unload goods from wooden boats beneath towering walls glowing faintly blue in evening light. The city feels prosperous yet calm tonight. Gardens cool the air along irrigation channels while distant temple bells echo softly. Empires change, but evenings remain consistent and quietly familiar. Eventually, the Persian Empire expands across Mesopotamia, absorbing Babylon and surrounding regions into a larger imperial structure during the 6th century BCE. Roads, trade routes, and communication networks link vast territories across the ancient world. Yet the rivers remain constant. Geography outlasts politics, a reminder that human arrangements rarely stay permanent for long. The great libraries and archives of Mesopotamia survive unevenly through conquest, fire, collapse, and burial beneath shifting earth. Some tablets break apart, while others remain preserved inside ruined buildings slowly covered by sand and debris. Centuries pass above them unnoticed. Entire civilizations sleep beneath abandoned courtyards, holding myths, records, and poems in clay. In the 19th century, archaeologists excavating across Iraq uncovered thousands of cuneiform tablets from Nineveh and other ancient cities. Scholars painstakingly decipher the writing system through careful comparison and translation. For the first time in over 2,000 years, Mesopotamian literature speaks again. Ancient voices return slowly from beneath the earth. When the Epic of Gilgamesh becomes readable again, modern readers encounter flood myths, heroic journeys, grief, friendship, and reflections on mortality. The emotional distance between civilizations narrows. People beside the Tigris once worried about loss and time in familiar ways. Ancient stories suddenly feel close beneath the same moonlit sky. You walk through long stone hallways inside a partially ruined Assyrian palace while cool evening air moves through broken archways. Carved reliefs remain on walls, softened by centuries of erosion. Dust gathers across fallen fragments of stone. The silence feels gentle, as abandoned spaces still hold traces of life and movement. The rivers flowing beside Nineveh, Babylon, and later Persian territories remain constant throughout these transitions. Water continues nourishing crops, carrying boats, and reflecting moonlight regardless of rulers above. Empires rise and fall, but rivers endure. Human history changes endlessly, yet water repeats its quiet patterns beneath drifting stars and desert winds. As darkness settles across ancient cities, monumental spaces grow silent once footsteps fade. Libraries close. Markets empty. Palace corridors cool under night air while rivers continue beyond the walls. Beneath ruined foundations, clay tablets rest in darkness, preserving memories no living voice remembers. Time seems to breathe softly through stone rooms. Night deepens as footsteps echo faintly through stone corridors, stretching toward shadowed palace doorways. Dust moves through moonlight across floors once walked by scribes and kings. Beyond the walls, rivers continue their endless journey through Mesopotamia, beneath silent stars. Ancient halls fall into calm darkness, where footsteps slowly disappear completely. The rivers continue shifting patiently across Mesopotamia, long after the great empires begin fading into memory. You walk beside an abandoned canal where dry reeds rustle softly beneath evening wind moving across the empty plain. Once, boats carried grain and stone through these waterways toward crowded cities filled with scribes, merchants, and temple workers. Now the canal lies quiet beneath drifting sand. The landscape changes slowly here. Like an enormous clock, nobody notices moving until entire centuries quietly disappear. Some cities weaken gradually when river channels move farther away over generations, leaving harbors isolated from reliable transport and irrigation systems increasingly difficult to maintain. Trade routes shift toward other regions, while populations slowly relocate beside more dependable waterways. Yet abandonment rarely happens suddenly. Houses empty one family at a time. Markets grow quieter each season. Eventually, even the dogs stop barking at strangers because there are no strangers left wandering through the dusty streets anymore. You stand among crumbling mud brick walls, barely rising above the earth beneath pale afternoon sunlight. Wind carries fine sand through doorways that once opened toward busy courtyards filled with cooking fires and conversation. The silence feels gentle rather than tragic. Civilization simply loosens its grip upon certain places over time. Nature waits patiently beside every city, allowing humans their centuries of activity before calmly reclaiming the land with dust, grass, insects, and weathered stillness. In southern Mesopotamia, some ancient urban centers become buried gradually beneath layers of sediment, collapsed brick, and wind-blown soil after their decline. From a distance, these buried ruins form low hills called tells scattered across the Iraqi plain. Travelers passing nearby for centuries often remain unaware that entire cities sleep beneath their feet. There is something strangely comforting about that reality, especially for anyone who has ever misplaced important belongings inside a bedroom considered thoroughly searched several times already. By the 19th century, European and Middle Eastern archaeologists begin excavating many of these ancient sites with growing fascination. Teams of workers remove layers of sand and hardened earth beneath relentless desert sunlight, while scholars examine inscriptions, foundations, and broken artifacts emerging slowly from the ground. The process feels patient and almost ceremonial. History returns gradually rather than dramatically, one clay tablet and shattered wall fragment at a time, beneath wide and silent skies. You watch laborers brush dust carefully from the face of a carved stone statue buried for thousands of years beneath the earth. Nearby, baskets filled with broken pottery and clay tablets rest beside excavation trenches descending into older layers of the city below. The air smells dry and warm, while wind moves softly across the site. Archaeology often resembles a conversation conducted very quietly with people who stopped answering questions several millennia ago, but still left surprisingly detailed notes. Among the discoveries are thousands of cuneiform tablets preserving records of trade, laws, prayers, astronomy, mathematics, and everyday life. Some remain remarkably intact despite centuries beneath collapsed buildings and shifting soil. Archaeologists also reveal traces of ancient gardens, irrigation channels, courtyards, and workshops buried under debris. Entire neighborhoods reappear through excavation, like memories slowly returning after a long, dreamless sleep. The ruins rarely appear grand in the way modern imagination expects ancient cities to be. Mud brick walls slowly soften under centuries of rain and heat, while foundations blend into surrounding earth. Yet beneath this quiet surface lies deep history. Layer after layer reveals generations rebuilding on older settlements, as cities grow upward while earlier versions sink gradually into the soil. You pause beside a partially excavated courtyard where faded brick outlines still mark rooms once filled with voices, tools, and lamplight. Small fragments of pottery lie near ancient drains leading toward long, dry canals. These spaces once held ordinary routines. People cooked, argued, and lived daily life with the same quiet repetition across centuries. As archaeologists continue working through Mesopotamia, They reconstruct forgotten kingdoms, languages, and traditions buried beneath silence. Yet they also face constant geological change. Rivers deposit new sediment. Wind reshapes ruins. Salt slowly erodes stone under desert sun. Nature never stops its quiet work. Every empire is treated with the same gradual fairness by time itself. The idea of permanence feels fragile while walking among ruins at sunset. Great cities once believed themselves eternal beside rivers. Kings built walls and temples meant to last forever. Yet today only fragments remain beneath open skies. Time does not destroy violently here. Instead, it gently softens everything until ambition becomes part of the landscape. Faded wall carvings and excavated palaces still show royal hunts, ceremonies, and processions across stone corridors now exposed to sunlight after millennia underground. Dust settles over carvings while archaeologists document details beneath protective tents. Scenes appear strangely peaceful now. Distance transforms human conflict into quiet decoration, a softened memory of power long past. You walk through ancient streets only partly uncovered from sand. Doorways open into darkness where rooms remain unexcavated below ground. Workers carefully brush soil from a clay tablet just discovered. It is the first human touch in thousands of years. Such moments feel more powerful than monuments, carrying voices back through deep time. Night spreads across the Mesopotamian plain while wind moves through ruined courtyards under fading light. Grass grows between broken bricks. Beyond excavations, rivers continue flowing through changed channels. Geography moves without resentment. The earth does not rush when reclaiming human places, slowly absorbing systems once built with confidence, ceremony, and ambition. Buried cities remind you that civilizations exist within larger rhythms shaped by rivers, climate, and deep time. Empires rise beside water, flourish briefly, then return to dust and silence. Yet the cycle feels calm tonight. Ruins rest beneath stars while their stories return slowly through archaeology before settling again into quiet earth. Darkness covers the ancient plain as wind passes through empty streets uncovered from sand. Broken walls cast long moonlit shadows while reeds whisper near forgotten canals. Beneath the ground, unopened chambers still wait with silent memories. Across Mesopotamia, the night wind moves softly through stone as if history itself is breathing quietly. The rivers still move through Mesopotamia tonight exactly as they did before the first cities appeared. You stand beside dark water under distant stars while warm wind crosses reeds. Snow melts far upstream into streams forming the Tigris and Euphrates. The water continues its journey through centuries with calm patience, older than memory itself. Across thousands of years, people gather beside these rivers seeking stability in a shifting landscape of flood, drought, and sediment. Villages rise from mud and reeds, temples grow above plains, empires build canals, laws, and trade routes. Yet rivers remain the foundation. Civilization begins not with conquest, but with water teaching people to stay together. You remember early marshlands where soft earth still held traces of the ice age beneath empty skies. Reeds moved in shallow waters while birds crossed silent wetlands at dawn. Long before kings or armies, the land prepared for human arrival. Rivers shaped fertile ground slowly across centuries, long before anyone existed to record the process. The first villages appear beside canals and floodplains where communities learn to guide water toward crops. Mud brick walls rise in heat while smoke drifts from cooking fires. Life follows rhythms of irrigation, harvest, and season. The relationship between people and rivers remains fragile. Water gives abundance, but never permanence, requiring constant care. You recall measured canals of Sumer stretching across plains marked by ropes and wooden stakes. Clay tablets record grain, labor, and irrigation schedules with precision. Societies organize around water movement. Civilization becomes a conversation between rivers and human effort, repeated across generations, sometimes interrupted by disputes resembling modern neighborhood disagreements over shared resources. Temple cities glow in memory beneath oil lamps and drifting dust as scribes press symbols into wet clay. Writing grows from irrigation, agriculture, and administration. Words begin as tools for counting grain and labor before becoming stories and prayers. Human thought takes physical form in river mud, shaped beside slowly flowing water. Rivers shift as rivers always do. Canals lengthen, harvests change, and city-states compete over irrigation access. Disputes between Lagash and Umma drift through history like wind across dry reeds. Even the stele of the vultures eventually breaks into fragments beneath dust. Time softens every border with quiet and relentless patience. Then Akkad rises beside the waterways, connecting distant cities through boats carrying grain beneath expanding imperial administration. Babylon follows later with its laws carved carefully into black stone, while gardens cool the evening air beside canals reflecting moonlight. Assyria builds libraries where clay tablets preserve stories, sleeping quietly beneath the earth for centuries. Persia extends roads and trade across unimaginable distances. Yet beneath every empire, the rivers continue flowing calmly without choosing favorites among kings. You begin noticing how brief human history appears when measured against geological rhythms shaping the floodplain itself. Entire dynasties rise, flourish, and disappear within periods shorter than the rivers require to carve new channels across the earth. Climate shifts slowly. Salt gathers within irrigated soil. Trade routes drift elsewhere beneath changing political landscapes. Meanwhile, the Tigris and Euphrates continue carrying sediment toward the sea exactly as they always have beneath the endless turning of seasons and stars. Archaeologists uncover buried cities beneath sand and collapsed brick after centuries of silence. Tablets emerge carrying forgotten myths and ordinary conversations preserved in hardened clay. Ancient voices return when cuneiform is deciphered in the 19th century. The rediscovery feels gentle rather than triumphant. History returns like distant music drifting softly through an open window at night. You walk beside the rivers in deepening darkness while cool air settles across the floodplain. Water reflects scattered stars broken by slow currents carrying silt from distant mountains. Reeds whisper near the banks while insects murmur within marshes. The soundscape feels delicate and still. Even the wind moves carefully across land, shaped by countless generations. Struggles for irrigation, territory, trade, and survival begin to feel small beside Earth's vast age. Wars that once defined kingdoms fade into fragments of stone and half-erased inscriptions beneath drifting sand. Rulers become names translated from broken tablets. Yet nothing is truly lost. Rivers preserve memory through soil, channels, and sediment layers resting beneath the plains. Far upstream tonight, fresh snowmelt enters mountain streams feeding the ancient waterways once again. Far downstream, water spreads slowly through marshes beneath moonlight before reaching distant seas beyond the horizon. Between those points lies the entire story of Mesopotamia, unfolding repeatedly through cycles of growth, adaptation, decline, and renewal, shaped by water and time. The process feels endless rather than tragic. Nature does not mourn change. It simply continues moving with calm and steady rhythm. You breathe slowly beside the dark current while stars drift overhead through enormous silence stretching beyond imagination. Somewhere beneath the earth nearby, broken walls and forgotten tablets still rest quietly beneath layers of dust accumulated across thousands of years. Somewhere ahead, future generations will likely stand beside these same rivers, wondering about the people who once built cities along their banks. The continuity feels comforting tonight, like hearing distant rain while resting safely indoors after a long and tiring journey. The desert grows quieter as the final hours before dawn approach. Wind moves gently across empty plains where ancient canals once carried water toward fields glowing green beneath vanished suns. The rivers continue eastward through darkness, carrying sediment, reflections, memory, and faint sounds almost too soft to hear. Their movement feels eternal from where you stand now beneath the immense sky. Human history passes beside them briefly, then settles again into silence beneath the patient earth. Soon, even the stars begin fading slowly above the horizon, while cold air settles over the marshes and abandoned ruins scattered across Mesopotamia. No voices remain now except distant water moving steadily through unseen channels beyond the darkness. The desert waits in complete stillness before morning, and far across the sleeping plain, beneath the deep and ancient silence of the world, only the quiet sound of the rivers continues flowing softly through the endless night. The script comes to a close. Thank you all for listening.